Hi, I'm Bill from CJ Pony Parts. Over the years, one of the most popular installations in a Mustang is to change out the rear gears. By going to a numerically higher rear gear, every time the drive shaft turns, the wheels are going to spin faster. It's going to make the car accelerate quicker. So today, we're going to show you the basics on how to install rear gears in any 8.8 solid axle Mustang. There's going to be a couple pieces necessary for the installation. We're going to start with the ring and pinion itself. We're going with Ford Racing's 410 ring and pinion for our application. Includes the ring and pinion assembly, along with the pinion nut and the crush collar. You'll also want to pick up an 8.8-inch rear installation kit before you start your installation itself. This kit here is our Supreme kit. It gives you all the bearings, shims, bolts, even the marking compound necessary for installation. In addition to what you see here, you'll also need 3 quarts of gear oil along with friction modifier depending on what carrier you're using. We're not going to do a step-by-step with our normal tool list with this installation. This is not a good first-timer install. We're going to show you the basics of how to do it and the special tools required. You can make up your mind whether you want to try it yourself or pay a professional. On a lot of your late model Mustangs, the cover itself is actually going to tell you what gear ratio is in it. In the case of this car, they've actually been changed before to a set of 430s. The car used to be raised heavily, but since the owner doesn't race it as much, he's going to go a little bit lower and go back to a set of 410s, so that's what we're installing today. You will have to remove the wheels and tires. I always start with the cover, that way you can start draining the oil and then take your wheels and tires off. Once you remove them all, just put the top center one in a little bit, a couple turns so the carrier doesn't come off, and we can pry it off. Now that we have the wheels off, the rear is still dripping, and remove everything else that's going to be in the way for our installation. We're going to remove the panhard bar, sway bar, then remove the caliper brackets for our brake calipers so we can remove the rotors and then be able to remove the axles. Before you remove the bearing caps off each side here, you're going to want to mark them because you want to make sure they go back in the same spot they were moved. You can use a marker or paint, but a lot of times when you clean up stuff, if that comes off, you make a small mark with a punch. Now do the same thing on our drive shaft. Once you've marked it, you can remove the drive shaft. You want to make sure you have the correct 12.12 millimeter socket to remove it. What we're going to do now is tie the drive shaft up and out of the way. If you remove it, fluid's going to come out of the transmission. But putting it out of the way, you don't have to drain the training. On a normal 8.8, you'll have a bolt on the side over here. You can remove that, remove the cross pin, and then remove your axles. In the case of this car, it's got a Detroit True Track in it. It's a little bit different. With the snap ring, pull the plate out. Before you can remove the axles, you want to remove the ABS sensors. These are plastics, you want to be real careful when removing, especially on an older car. They can break when they come out. Now you want to push the axles in so you can see the C-clips, and then you can remove them with a magnet. Once the C-clips are removed, now you can remove the axles. Then make sure you grab a rag, and as you're pulling the axle out, you want to hold it up so it doesn't drag the splines against the seals because it can damage them. Now we can remove the carrier end caps. Once you remove the carrier, you want to grab the shims, and we're going to measure them out so you know what width we had on each side. You'll need a mic for this. Once the carrier is out, we can move on now and remove the pinion nut. To remove the pinion itself, there is a puller you can use to do it, but sometimes you get lucky and just tap it with a hammer, it will come out. Once the pinion's out, you can remove the pinion seal, and the pinion bearing will come out with it. The only part here you're going to want to reuse is going to be this metal shim. Now you want to grab a large punch so you can work out the bearing races. Once everything apart, grab some brake clean, just clean it all up. You want to make sure you scrape any remaining gasket material off here. Now we'll give it a quick cleaning with a wheel to make sure we have a good surface for our new gasket. We're going to start the installation of our new gears by installing the bearing races. This is another place you're actually going to need a specialty tool for the installation. A bearing and race kit like this can be purchased from some auto parts stores for as little as $30. You can also possibly rent one. You want to start by putting the race up into place. Get it seated as flat as possible. You'll kind of feel right when it goes into place. Then use the tool to hammer it in. The pinion bearing should slide down on the new pinion. We found with the Ford racing gears with the coating they use, it doesn't go on smoothly, so cleaning the coating off this area here will make it install a lot easier. Okay, and we're good to go there. Now we've moved over to the press so we can remove the pinion bearing off the pinion so we can get to the shim. It's another special tool. You will need a press to do this job. Now you can remove the shim off the old pinion. Just like before, we're going to clean this off and mic it. I'll put some anti-seize on the bottom of this so we can install the new bearing. Put the original shim in place. And go back over to our press. Now that our pinion bearing's pressed on, we can install the pinion back in our housing. Before we install the pinion, we'll put a little grease in the bearings. and ready to install. Put the bearing into place with the shim behind it, and the seal, and hammer it into place. Now we're going to prep the flange by first putting some silicone in the splines. Now decide to crush sleeve over the pinion and ready to install. We'll put the pinion through the housing. Put the flange up into place and start tightening the nut. Now you want to hold on to the flange and start tightening the nut down so you get rid of the slack in the pinion. Once you have the pinion nut tight and there's no play at all, you want to grab a torque wrench and measure it. You want it to be around 25. There we go, 25, right where we want it. We'll start the carrier prep by removing the old ring. Before you install the new ring, grab one of your old bolts. Just make sure it threads cleanly into all the holes before you install the new bolts, which have the thread locker already on them. Even though it's a new ring, you want to go around the outside edge with a file. Just make sure there's no burrs on the section here. Now you got to remove the carrier bearings. If you're working with a stock or a Ford housing, there'll be an actual little indent here that will allow you to use a puller to get underneath the bearing and pull it off. With a Detroit, it's not actually possible, so what we're going to do is cut the bearing off. First we'll remove the outside ring, then we'll cut the inner off. Once you have both the original bearings off, now we can press on the new bearings. Get that seated in place. Now I can put the new ring on. Usually it'll slide right over. If not, sometimes you gotta tap it on, but you won't need to press for this. Be careful not to over tighten these. You will have to torque them down properly. What you want to do is just use a pry bar to hold it in place while you torque it. What we're going to do now is assemble new shims for our carrier before we install it. You could reuse the old ones, but we are going to choose to use new ones here. What we'll do is put it together and just start measuring it out. Go up the measurement to the originals. That's a good place to get you started. Okay, we're 235, we need to get closer to 257. Okay, and there we go. That'll be right for our left-hand side. Now we'll make on for the right-hand side. You want to put the races on the carrier bearings and you're ready to reinstall your carrier. It's a good idea to get someone to give you a hand here. That way one person can hold the shims in place, the other person can put the carrier up into the rear. Now you want to grab your dial indicator and check your backlash. Now turn the pinion until you get to 0, and you want to check the play. You want to be between 9 and 11 thousandths. Opinions are going to differ on this. We found keeping in that range is going to be the best for it. Right at about 12, so we're off just a hair. Something like that though, you do want to go back and shim it properly because being there could make the gears noisy. Because the number was higher than what we wanted, we took a 3,000 shim from the right side and moved it to the left. If the number's too low, you'll do the opposite. You'll take one from the left side, move it to the right, and then remeasure. And there we go, right at 10. We're ready to put it back together. Before reassembly, you want to remove the fill plug here just to make sure you can get it out. Okay. Now I'm going to reinstall the end caps, making sure you line them up in the same place you removed them from. Once the caps are tightened down, we're going to double check our backlash one more time. So you're perfect, we're right at 10. Then we're going to use this applied marking compound to check a pattern. If you have someone to help you, put a little pressure on it with a pry bar, then you're going to want to turn it. You can see our pattern. Ideally, you're going to have it a little further down, but we do have a nice good pattern across the T, so it should be okay. We're ready to put it back together. Once the carrier is assembled, you can reassemble everything we took apart. We'll start by putting the axles back in. Reinstall the C-clips. Now reinstall the spacer. Reinstall the ABS sensors. Now rotors and calipers. The kit includes a gasket. We suggest using ultra gray silicone. It gives you a much better seal, very similar to what the factory is going to use. Put the cover back up into place. Now we're going to fill it up. We're using Royal Purple 75 140 synthetic, so it doesn't require any additional additives to be installed. Now we can bolt the drive shaft back to the pinion, reinstall our wheels and tires, and our installation's finished. Our test drive went great and our gears are nice and quiet. As long as you get your backlash set properly and you have a good pattern, you shouldn't have any noise with your installation. Keep in mind when you're finished, you do have to correct your speedometer. If you have a pre-99, you can do that with a speedometer gear. Anything newer, you will require a tuner. Like we said before, this install is not for everybody and does require some special tools. If you do decide to try it, make sure you have the right tools in advance and give yourself the better part of a day for your first installation. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for more installation videos.